Would you dare live in a house that has never been truly abandoned because it won't let anyone leave? The question lingered in Sarah's mind as she and Daniel pulled up the cracked gravel driveway of the mansion. From the road, the house rose like a ghost out of the mist, its dark Victorian spires stabbing the gray sky, the windows reflecting no light at all. Even from a distance, it didn't look deserted. It looked watchful, as if it had been waiting for them. The couple had spent months searching for a new home. City life had drained them, expensive rent, endless noise, and neighbors who never slept. When Sarah saw the listing online, she laughed at first, thinking it was too good to be true. A massive, historic estate with acres of woodland surrounding it listed at a fraction of its value. The ad read simply, "A beautiful Victorian home, recently vacated, ready for a loving family." Sarah had felt a strange pull immediately, like the house had been calling out to her. Daniel was more hesitant, but agreed it was a chance they couldn't pass up. Now, standing in the shadow of its towering gables, Sarah felt a cold weight in her chest. The place was beautiful, yes, but in the way a sleeping predator was beautiful, still, silent, but brimming with something that could snap awake at any moment. The front porch sagged with age, its wooden boards groaning beneath their feet as they climbed the steps. The door was heavy oak, its iron handle worn smooth. When Daniel pushed it open, it resisted at first, as though the house itself was reluctant to let them inside. Finally, it creaked wide, exhaling a draft of air so cold Sarah shivered. The scent inside was damp wood, old dust, and something else she couldn't name, like iron and earth, metallic and sour. "Smells like history," Daniel joked, forcing a smile. Sarah tried to laugh, but her voice caught in her throat. She glanced around the entryway. The ceiling arched high above them, beams of dark wood crisscrossing overhead. A grand staircase curled upward like a spine, its banister polished though no one had lived here for years. Tall windows lined the hallway, but their glass was tinted so dark that the sunlight outside seemed to vanish the moment it touched them. They began to explore. Room after room stretched before them, ornate parlors with fireplaces, a library stacked with forgotten books, bedrooms with beds already made as if someone had just stepped out. Sarah felt the strangest sensation as she moved through the rooms, like walking through someone else's memories. Dust coated everything, yet the furniture seemed untouched, arranged neatly, waiting. "It's like no one ever left," Sarah whispered. Daniel, carrying their suitcases inside, chuckled nervously. Or maybe no one wanted to. They laughed, but it didn't last. That night, after they unpacked only the essentials, Sarah found herself unable to sleep. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums until you imagine sounds that aren't there. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Then she heard it. A faint creak, as if footsteps were moving along the hallway outside their bedroom door. Slow, measured. She held her breath and nudged Daniel awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Daniel frowned, listening. The steps stopped. He shrugged, half asleep. Old house, wood settles, go back to sleep. But Sarah couldn't. She sat up, heart hammering, and stared at the thin strip of light beneath the door. She swore she saw a shadow pass across it. The next morning, Sarah decided it must have been her imagination. Moving into a place like this was bound to play tricks on her mind. She brushed it off, determined not to start off paranoid. But as she made breakfast in the kitchen, she noticed something strange. The back door that had been unlocked yesterday was now bolted shut. Not just locked, but sealed with heavy rusted chains looped through the handle. She called out to Daniel, asking if he had done it, but he shook his head. "I didn't even know we had chains," he muttered, frowning at the door. They tried the other exits. The side doors had stiffened, the locks refusing to turn. Even the windows resisted when they attempted to pry them open. "It's probably just swollen wood," Daniel said, forcing a laugh that didn't sound convincing. "Old frames get stuck." But Sarah could feel it in her bones. Something else was wrong. The doors hadn't just stuck overnight. They had been shut. That evening, while Daniel dozed on the couch, Sarah decided to step out onto the front porch for air. She turned the knob of the heavy oak door, expecting it to swing open like it had when they arrived. Instead, it refused to budge. She twisted harder, sweat prickling her palms, but the handle wouldn't turn. She called Daniel, panic rising in her chest. He came over, tried the handle himself, even braced his shoulder against the wood and shoved. Nothing. The door was locked, sealed from the inside, as though someone, or something, had closed it after they entered and refused to let them out. "Must be jammed," Daniel said, but his voice cracked. He banged his fist against the door. "Hello? Anyone out there?" Only silence answered. Sarah's stomach dropped as the truth began to gnaw at her. They hadn't just bought a house. They had stepped into a cage. And now, as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, the mansion seemed to settle around them with a sound like a sigh. Content, satisfied, as though it had finally gotten what it wanted. Sarah whispered, her voice trembling, "Daniel, what if the neighbors were right? What if this house doesn't let anyone leave?" And as if to answer her, the lights flickered, every bulb in the house pulsing once, twice, before going out completely. They were left in absolute darkness. The next morning was gray, the kind of colorless dawn that made the house's windows glow faintly like empty eyes. Sarah hadn't slept much. The memory of the lights going out still haunted her, even though power had inexplicably returned by sunrise. She forced herself to believe it was faulty wiring, but deep inside she couldn't shake the thought that the darkness itself had been alive, watching them. Daniel, more practical, decided they should meet the neighbors. "We can't keep spooking ourselves," he said, pouring weak coffee into a chipped mug. "If people live around here, they'll know about the house. Maybe they'll even help us with the doors." He tried to sound casual, but Sarah noticed how he avoided looking at the front door as he said it. They drove into town, though Sarah swore the car struggled to start, as if the house resented them leaving even for a short while. The road twisted through empty woods, the branches clawing against the sky. By the time they reached the small cluster of shops that passed for a town center, Sarah was almost relieved to see people milling about. Real, breathing people who laughed and carried groceries and went about their day without dread pressing on their shoulders. The first neighbor they approached was an older woman stacking crates of fruit outside a general store. She froze when Sarah mentioned where they lived. The smile dropped from her face, and her hand stilled on the apples. "That house?" she asked quietly, her voice almost trembling. "The Blackwood place?" "Yes," Sarah said hesitantly. "We just moved in yesterday. It's beautiful, but—" "Get out!" The woman cut her off sharply, her eyes darting around as if afraid others might overhear. "You should leave. Don't stay another night. That house—" She lowered her voice to a whisper. "It doesn't let people go." Daniel chuckled nervously, trying to break the tension. "We've heard the ghost stories. But come on. Houses don't trap people. You think it's haunted?" The woman's face hardened. "I don't think. I know. My sister lived there years ago. She and her husband. They vanished. No one saw them leave. The sheriff searched every inch, but the house was empty. Empty, but not abandoned. Their car still sat in the drive, their clothes still in the closets. Like they never left, but weren't there anymore either." She shivered and turned away, refusing to say more. Sarah felt her blood run cold. She wanted to ask more questions, but Daniel gently tugged her arm. "Come on, let's not bother her." His tone was light, but his grip was tight. They spoke to a few others in town, but the reactions were all the same. Stiffened expressions, lowered voices, polite excuses to end the conversation. No one wanted to talk about the Blackwood house. No one wanted to remember. On the drive back, silence sat between them like a third passenger. Sarah stared out the window at the blur of trees, her thoughts heavy. The more people refused to speak, the more certain she became that the warnings weren't superstition. They were fear. Real fear. Back at the mansion, the air felt different, heavier, like the house knew where they had been. Sarah almost imagined it sulking, displeased that they had tried to reach beyond its walls. As she crossed the threshold, a strange thought flashed through her mind. It's jealous. That night, the house revealed more of its secrets. Sarah was unpacking boxes in the living room when she noticed something strange on the mantelpiece. A photograph framed in silver stood neatly among the dust. Her breath caught when she looked closer. It was a wedding photo, hers and Daniel's. She recognized the church, the dress, even the way Daniel's tie had been slightly crooked. But they hadn't brought any photos downstairs. That particular photo was still in an album packed away in a sealed box. Sarah ran upstairs to check, her hands shaking. She tore open the box of photo albums and flipped through the plastic sleeves. The picture was gone. The empty slot gaped like a wound. "Daniel!" she screamed. He came running, his face pale when she showed him the frame. "How the hell did this get here?" he muttered, looking around the room as if someone else must be hiding nearby. "Did you—" "Of course I didn't," Sarah snapped, her voice rising with panic. "Daniel, the house put it here. That's not possible. Neither is a door locking itself from the inside," she hissed. They argued in circles, fear sharpening their voices until both fell silent, realizing that raising their voices made the house feel alive, as though the walls themselves leaned closer to listen. Later, as they tried to sleep, Sarah awoke to the sound of murmuring. Faint, almost like the rustle of leaves, but unmistakably voices. She sat up, straining to listen. The whispers seemed to seep through the walls, curling into the room from every direction. She couldn't make out words, only a low chorus, like dozens of people speaking at once. Heart pounding, she slipped from bed and crept to the hallway. The murmurs grew louder. She followed them down the stairs, across the darkened living room, until she reached the mantelpiece. The silver-framed photo was gone. In its place sat a different picture, one she had never seen before. It showed her and Daniel, but older. Much older. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow, and they stood in the very living room where she now stood, dressed in the same clothes they wore tonight. Sarah's knees buckled, and the frame slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor. The whispers surged louder, wrapping around her, filling her head. She clutched her ears and screamed for Daniel. He came stumbling down the stairs, but when he reached her, the whispers stopped instantly. The photo was gone. Nothing remained on the mantelpiece but dust. "Sarah, there's nothing there," Daniel said softly, trying to calm her. But his eyes flicked nervously to the empty mantel, betraying his own fear. Sarah shook her head violently. "It's showing us something. It wants us to know we don't leave. We never leave." Daniel tried to speak, but his voice died in his throat as a sudden, deafening slam echoed through the house. The front door had just shut itself with a finality that made the walls tremble. The slam echoed through every hallway like thunder, rattling the old glass panes in their frames. Sarah and Daniel froze, staring toward the front door. It stood tall and immovable, the heavy oak blending seamlessly into the shadows, as though daring them to approach. Sarah's first instinct was to run to it, to wrench it open and flee into the night. But something deeper, something instinctive and primal, kept her rooted in place. She didn't want to touch it. She didn't even want to go near it. It felt less like an exit now and more like a sealed tomb. Daniel, braver or perhaps more stubborn, marched to the door and grabbed the iron handle. His knuckles whitened as he pulled, shoved, even kicked. The door didn't budge. "It's like it's fused shut," he muttered, panting. He tried again, slamming his shoulder against the wood, but it was like pushing against a mountain. The door absorbed every blow without so much as a tremor. Sarah hugged her arms around herself, feeling the cold spread deeper. "Daniel, it doesn't want us to leave." "Stop saying that," he snapped, turning on her. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale with exhaustion. "It's just a door. It's just an old house. Don't feed into this nonsense." But even as he said it, the words lacked conviction. The following days blurred into a strange rhythm of unease. They tried every exit, every window. Daniel pried at frames with tools from the shed, but the glass wouldn't break. He swung a hammer until his arms gave out, and each time the glass rippled like water before settling back into perfect clarity, not a single crack remaining. He cursed under his breath, sweat dripping down his temples while Sarah watched silently, numb with a dread she couldn't shake. At night, the house grew restless. The footsteps returned, heavier now, pacing the hallways just outside their room. Sometimes Sarah swore she saw the doorknob twitch, as if someone were deciding whether to come inside. Other times, the whispers returned, flowing through the walls like water through pipes. She pressed her ear against the plaster once and recoiled instantly. On the other side, voices chanted in perfect unison. They weren't random words. They were saying her name. One evening, desperate for normalcy, Daniel suggested dinner in the dining room. They lit candles, opened a bottle of wine, and tried to pretend everything was fine. For a moment, it almost worked. They talked about the life they wanted here, about fixing the garden, about hosting friends one day. But then, Sarah noticed something odd on the table. The silverware had been set before they arrived. Forks, knives, and plates lined up neatly for two. Except now, in the flickering candlelight, there were 3 place settings. "Daniel," she whispered, her fork clattering to the table. He followed her gaze. His jaw tightened. Without a word, he stood and swept the 3rd setting onto the floor. The plate shattered, the sound ringing too loud in the cavernous room. Silence followed. Then, slowly, almost mockingly, the 2 remaining place settings slid across the table, inch by inch, until they sat side by side. Sarah screamed, pushing her chair back. Daniel grabbed her hand, pulling her away from the table. But even as they fled the dining room, she saw the forks begin to rise, one after another, balancing in the air as though lifted by invisible hands. That night, neither of them slept. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the hammer he had used earlier, while Sarah curled against the wall, staring at the door. At some point, she must have drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, because she woke with a start to find Daniel standing by the window, his breath fogging the glass. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Listening," he said flatly. She joined him. The night outside was thick and black, the woods barely visible, but as she pressed her ear to the glass, she realized what he meant. The house wasn't just alive inside, it was alive outside too. The wind didn't sound like wind. It sounded like voices. 1,000 hushed voices carried on the breeze, circling the house, murmuring in a language she didn't understand. "Maybe if we burn it," Daniel whispered suddenly, his voice raw. "Houses can't keep people if they're reduced to ash." Sarah wanted to agree, but a thought struck her like a knife. What if it burns us before it burns itself? The next morning she awoke to find Daniel gone. Panic surged until she heard clattering in the basement. She rushed down, the old wooden stairs creaking beneath her. She found him hunched over an ancient furnace, sweat streaking his face as he fed wood into it. "If the house wants to play games," he muttered, "then we'll fight back. We'll burn it from the inside." But as Sarah stepped closer, her eyes widened in horror. The furnace was already lit. Flames roared inside, but Daniel hadn't put the wood in yet. The fire was burning on its own, brighter and hotter than any normal flame. It cast shadows across the walls, and those shadows weren't random. They were figures, dozens of them, men, women, children, all writhing as if trapped in agony. Their mouths opened and closed in silent screams, their hands stretching out as if trying to claw free from the flickering light. "Daniel," Sarah whispered, clutching his arm. "It's not a furnace. It's a prison." He looked at her, his eyes wide, but before he could speak, the fire surged upward, licking the ceiling. The shadows of the figures twisted violently, and this time they weren't silent. A chorus of screams filled the basement, loud and agonizing, shaking the walls. Sarah clapped her hands over her ears, but the sound pierced through her skull. The furnace door slammed shut with a metallic clang. Instantly, the fire died. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. They stood frozen, staring at the cold iron door. Then, faintly from the other side of the metal came a whisper. Not many voices this time. Just two. Clear. Familiar. It was their voices. Sarah staggered back, her knees weak. "Daniel, that was us." And before either of them could move, the furnace door slowly creaked open again, revealing nothing but darkness inside. A darkness so deep, so impossibly black, it felt like it was pulling them toward it. After the furnace incident, the house seemed to settle into a sinister rhythm. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow felt purposeful, as though the walls themselves were studying them, learning their fears, feeding on them. Sarah and Daniel tried to convince themselves that it was all psychological. Stress, exhaustion, the isolation of living in a place so vast and old. But even they couldn't deny that the house was changing around them. Hallways stretched longer than they had the day before. Rooms seemed rearranged overnight. What had been the guest bedroom was now a study, with books and papers stacked in unfamiliar order. The mansion was alive, and it had plans they didn't yet understand. Determined to find answers, Sarah began exploring the attic. She hoped to find some historical records, something that could explain why the house acted like it had a mind of its own. The stairs groaned under her weight, dust swirling in the pale morning light that filtered through grimy windows. Boxes and trunks lined the walls, forgotten relics of previous occupants. She opened one, revealing yellowed letters and diaries, brittle with age. Each diary bore the same name in ornate script: Blackwood. As she flipped through the pages, her stomach turned. They were accounts of families who had lived here decades, even a century ago. Each diary recounted the same slow descent into terror. The first entries were mundane: celebrations, renovations, family gatherings. Then, subtle shifts, misplaced items, doors locking inexplicably, whispers in empty rooms. By the final pages, the handwriting became frantic, jagged, almost illegible. Families reported hearing voices that mimicked their own, seeing shadows in mirrors that weren't their reflections, and finally, vanishing without a trace. A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she realized the similarities. "It's happening to us exactly like this." She tucked the diaries under her arm and raced downstairs to find Daniel. He was in the kitchen, staring at the walls. "I think the house knows we're looking," he said quietly. His hands trembled as he held a piece of paper that had appeared out of nowhere. It was a drawing of the dining room, but with figures seated at the table that weren't them. The figures were faint, scribbled, and twisted, yet disturbingly human. Their faces were blank, hollow, but their hands reached toward the space where Sarah and Daniel would sit. "We can't ignore this," Sarah whispered. "We need to figure out what it wants." Daniel nodded reluctantly, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe it's trying to trap us, keep us here. That's why the doors won't open, the windows won't break, the furnace, the shadows." His voice trailed off as the house groaned, the sound echoing through every floor and hall. That night they tried to sleep in the master bedroom. The air felt thick, almost viscous, and time itself seemed to warp. Sarah glanced at the clock. 10:47 p.m. She blinked. The hands hadn't moved. She rubbed her eyes. 10:47 p.m. again. Minutes stretched, hours compressed, until she couldn't distinguish one moment from the next. Daniel woke suddenly, gasping. I was in the hallway," he stammered. "I don't remember walking there." Sarah shook her head. "It's the house. It's moving us, or time, or both." They decided to explore the upper floors, hoping to find more clues about the house's history. The staircase wound upward endlessly, each step seeming longer than the last. When they reached the top, a locked door at the end of the hall caught their attention. It hadn't been there yesterday. Or maybe it had, but now it felt different. Daniel tried the doorknob. Locked. They exchanged a glance, and Sarah's pulse quickened. She reached out, and as her fingers touched the cold metal, It swung open without resistance. Inside was a dining room unlike any they had seen. A massive table filled the center, set for a feast that smelled faintly of decay and rot. Chairs surrounded it, each occupied by skeletal remains, their skulls tilted as though they were watching. The walls were lined with portraits of previous residents, decayed, hollow-eyed figures, but unmistakably alive in expression. Their gazes followed Sarah and Daniel as they entered. Sarah staggered back, horror flooding her senses. "Daniel, this is all the families, the ones who vanished." Daniel's voice trembled. "The house, it doesn't just trap us, it keeps them." A sudden cold wind slammed the door behind them. They spun around, but it was as if the hallway itself had disappeared. The room expanded, walls stretching, the ceiling climbing impossibly high. Shadows twisted and pooled around the skeletal guests, reaching toward them with bony fingers. The whispers returned, louder, insistent, echoing in their heads. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. She could almost hear the voices of the trapped residents, screaming silently in warning. "We don't leave, never!" Daniel grabbed her arm. "We have to get out of here now!" They ran toward the door, but it wasn't the door they had entered. The room had rearranged itself, the exit gone. The table now stretched endlessly, the skeletal figures leaning forward as if to block them. The portraits on the walls seemed to twitch, mouths opening in silent screams. A sudden realization struck Sarah. The house isn't just alive, it's conscious, it's feeding on us. It remembers every family, every soul, and it's keeping them here. It wants us to join them. Suddenly, a hand, not skeletal but pale and cold, clutched her shoulder. She screamed, spinning around, but no one was there. Daniel pulled her into a corner, eyes wide with terror. The whispers grew into a chorus, repeating a single phrase over and over. "Stay. Forever. Stay." Sarah's stomach dropped. She turned toward the center of the room and froze. One of the skeletal figures had moved. Its jaw unhinged in a silent snarl, its empty eyes fixed on them, unwavering, as if recognizing new prey. The couple backed into the corner, hearts hammering, unable to move. Time warped, shadows stretched, and the whispers became deafening. And then, from the ceiling above, came the sound of footsteps. Not on the stairs, not on the floor. They were coming from everywhere at once, circling, pacing, getting closer. Sarah grabbed Daniel's hand. "We're trapped," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We can't leave, we can't leave." And then, a voice, calm, deliberate, and horrifying, echoed through the room, coming from inside their very minds. "Welcome home." The next morning, or at least what they thought was morning, Sarah awoke to an unnatural stillness. The air was unnervingly cold, thick with a damp, metallic scent that seemed to seep into her lungs. Daniel was nowhere in sight. Panic surged through her as she scrambled out of bed, calling his name. The walls of the house, as if hearing her cries, groaned in response, low and resonant, like a chorus of deep, disappointed sighs. She moved through the hallways, each step echoing far too long, the floorboards stretching beneath her as if the house itself were reshaping the path she walked. A strange pull guided her toward the library. When she entered, she found Daniel crouched over a small pile of old tomes and letters he had uncovered in the shadows. His eyes were hollow, haunted, yet fixed with a terrible understanding. "I think I understand now," he whispered, barely audible. "The house, it's not just a building. It's alive, yes, but more than that. It's a predator. It doesn't just trap people, it consumes them." Sarah stared at him, terror rooting her in place. "Consumes them? What do you mean?" He pulled out an old ledger, its leather cracked and worn. Names were written across the yellowed pages. Hundreds, maybe thousands, spanning decades, some even centuries. Beside each name were dates of residence, all ending with a strange symbol she didn't recognize. Her gaze fell on the last entry, two names that made her stomach turn cold: Sarah and Daniel. "What? How?" she began, voice trembling. Daniel swallowed hard. "The house doesn't just trap bodies. It traps identities, memories, souls. It's been feeding on every family that's ever lived here. Every vanished resident is part of it now. And I think it wants us to join them." The room seemed to pulse with the house's awareness. The books on the shelves rattled, papers lifted and twirled in invisible drafts. Shadows coiled along the walls, twisting into shapes that resembled people, past residents, always watching, always waiting. "We need to leave," Sarah said, trying to steady herself. "We can't stay here." Daniel shook his head. "You don't get it. We can't leave. The doors, the windows, everything. It controls everything. The house is stronger than us, smarter than us, and it remembers. It never forgets." Suddenly the whispers returned, louder, sharper, cutting into their minds. They spoke in unison, chanting a single horrifying phrase: "Become us, become us, become us." Sarah clutched her head, trying to block them out, but the voices burrowed into her brain. She felt her memories fray, tiny fragments of her past slipping into the void. Daniel reached out, grabbing her hands, holding on as if his touch could anchor her to reality. "They're trying to replace us," he muttered. "Every second we stay, they take a little more." Desperate for answers, they explored the attic, uncovering journals and diaries of the house's original builders. The mansion had been constructed over a mass grave, centuries old. The founder, a man obsessed with eternal life, had performed unthinkable rituals to bind the souls buried beneath to the house itself. He had woven a curse into the foundation, the walls, the very beams. Anyone who entered would be absorbed, their essence preserved forever within the mansion's consciousness. Sarah read aloud from a brittle journal. "The house must never be empty. Those who enter must remain, or their souls will be consumed by the walls themselves. Each generation strengthens the house. Each occupant is a thread in its eternal fabric." She dropped the journal, horror etched into her every feature. We're part of it already," she whispered. Daniel didn't respond. He was staring into one of the mirrors that lined the hallways. And then Sarah saw it too. Their reflections, hers and Daniel's, were not their own. Their faces were pale, gaunt, hollowed, as if they had aged decades in mere hours. Eyes sunken, skin stretched tight, expressions vacant. The reflection moved slightly, with a delay, as if it were observing, judging, and already claiming them. "They're showing us what we'll become," Daniel breathed. His hands shook as he reached toward the glass, but it recoiled from his touch like a living thing. The house groaned in response, deep and resonant, vibrating the floor beneath their feet. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as if inhaling their fear. Every shadow in the room twisted toward them, fingers reaching from the corners, clawing at the air. Sarah felt herself pulled backward, an invisible force tugging at her very soul. "We have to try something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't let it take us completely." They ran through the twisting hallways, searching for any exit, any weak point. Every door led to another hallway. Every window revealed only an endless expanse of darkness. Time lost all meaning, hours, minutes, seconds. They were trapped in a loop, the house rearranging itself, warping reality around them. And then they heard it. A voice, calm, deliberate, and impossibly old. It echoed from every corner, from the floor beneath them, from the very walls themselves. "Welcome home, children of the house." Sarah and Daniel froze, hearts pounding, as a new horror revealed itself. The walls around them began to shimmer and ripple like liquid, and within the surface, ghostly faces appeared. The faces were familiar, faces from the portraits, from the skeletal remains, from the diaries. each face twisted into an expression of anticipation, hunger, and cruelty. "They're not just watching us," Sarah whispered, shaking. "They're waiting for us to join them." Daniel turned to her, eyes wide. "We have to fight it," he said, though his voice sounded hollow even to him. "We have to fight the house itself." But the house had already begun. Doors slammed shut behind them, windows sealed tight. Shadows coalesced into solid shapes, walls bending, ceilings stretching impossibly high. The very floor quivered beneath their feet, as though the mansion were alive, aware of every move they made. And then, from the center of the house, a voice, low, ancient, and omnipotent, boomed, resonating through every bone in their bodies. "Your souls belong to me, forever." Sarah's blood ran cold. She grabbed Daniel's hand. The two of them pressed together against the invisible pull, the suffocating weight of centuries. The mansion's consciousness, the culmination of every trapped soul, every vanished family, every whispered warning had revealed itself. And it was hungry for them. They screamed, but the house didn't flinch. It waited. It had always waited, and it would not be denied. Sarah and Daniel's panic reached a fever pitch as the mansion seemed to tighten around them. Hallways stretched infinitely. Doors vanished only to reappear elsewhere, and shadows twisted like living serpents. The whispers were no longer faint. They were deafening, 1,000 voices chanting in unison, merging into a single horrifying command. "Join us! Join us! Stay forever!" They ran blindly, their footsteps echoing endlessly against the warped walls. Each turn led them deeper into the mansion's labyrinthine core, a place that seemed to exist outside of normal space and time. The house was no longer merely a trap. It was a predator, stalking them, anticipating every move. Every panic-driven decision played into its hands. Finally, they reached a massive door at the heart of the mansion. Unlike the other doors, this one was black, pulsating faintly as if it had a heartbeat. Daniel looked at Sarah, desperation etched on his face. This has to be it. Maybe it's a way out. Or maybe it's the source. With a shared glance, they pushed it open together. The room beyond was vast, impossibly high-ceilinged, and lit by a dim, unnatural glow. The walls were lined with mirrors, floor to ceiling, but the reflections were wrong. They didn't mimic reality. They showed every previous resident, trapped in twisted, agonized poses, their faces contorted with terror and despair. And then Sarah saw it. The first couple, the ones from the opening diary entries, standing inside the mirrors, reaching out toward them, mouths moving, screaming silently. A sudden realization hit Sarah like a thunderclap. The house didn't just trap people. It stored them. Every soul, every fragment of identity was preserved within its walls. Every whispered warning, every creaking floorboard, every shadow, every door. Everything had been orchestrated to break the mind and bend the will, forcing new occupants into the mansion's consciousness. Daniel grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "We can't fight it. It's not just a building, it's..." A voice cut through, smooth, omnipotent, and echoing from every surface at once. "I am the house. I am memory. I am hunger. I am time. And now, I am you." The walls shimmered, and Sarah realized the ultimate horror. The house was not only alive, it was sentient, and it required new identities to survive. Every person it trapped became a thread in its eternal tapestry, feeding its consciousness, giving it form and substance. And now it had chosen them. Panic surged. They ran toward the mirrors, thinking they might smash them, break the spell, free themselves. But each reflection rippled, forming a portal that reached out with shadowed hands, pulling, stretching, consuming. Sarah screamed as a hand, dark, hollow, impossibly cold, gripped her wrist, and she felt herself drawn forward against her will. Daniel lunged, grabbing her other hand, but the pull was too strong. Their movements slowed, their bodies feeling heavy, limbs resisting as if the very air had thickened into a viscous, living substance. The mirrors shimmered, revealing not just past residents, but their own future selves. Hollow-eyed, gaunt, trapped forever, faces frozen in eternal despair. "No, no!" Sarah screamed, kicking, thrashing, but the mansion's will was inexorable. She realized with a chill she could not shake that the house did not merely want them, it needed them. Without new souls, the mansion would weaken, fade, or worse, collapse. The mansion's survival depended on their permanent residence. And then, Daniel's voice faltered, almost lost in the overwhelming presence. "Sarah, I see it now. This isn't just a house. It's us. Every family, every memory, every soul. It's all part of one endless consciousness. And if we stay, if it consumes us, we become part of it too." The pull intensified, dragging them both toward the mirrors. Sarah felt herself slipping, identity fraying, memories twisting, fear amplifying beyond comprehension. Faces from the past lined the walls, mouths opening and closing, whispering their own names, calling to them, beckoning. And then, in a final horrifying realization, Sarah remembered the opening thought, the hook that had drawn them in without them knowing. Would you dare live in a house that has never been truly abandoned, because it won't let anyone leave? The house hadn't been waiting for them merely to trap them. It had been waiting to complete itself. Every vanishing family, every trapped soul, every whisper, every creak, they had all been feeding the same purpose, to create an eternal conscious entity. Sarah understood now. They were never meant to leave, never meant to escape, never meant to resist. Resistance was part of the process. It strengthened the mansion's awareness, enriched its consciousness. She looked at Daniel, eyes wide with shared understanding and terror. "There's no way out," she whispered, voice shaking. "No," he replied. "There's only it." And then the final horror revealed itself. Their own reflections in the mirrors, pale, hollow, terrified, reached out and merged with the shadows of the past residents. The pull became irresistible. The mirrors rippled like liquid. Their own screams echoed infinitely, swallowed by the mansion, absorbed, preserved. They were no longer individuals. They were threads woven into the endless, conscious tapestry of the house. The last thing Sarah saw before consciousness dissolved entirely was the mansion itself, towering and gleaming in its own eerie light, utterly satisfied. Its doors, forever locked from the inside, awaited the next unsuspecting visitors. The Blackwood house had never been empty, and it never would be. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the walls, faint whispers continued, calling out for new occupants, for new threads to add to its eternal, sentient existence. Welcome home. The mansion exhaled, alive and complete, as if centuries of hunger had finally been satisfied.